Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Jennifer Churchill, and this is the Happy Healthy Leaders podcast. I am so excited to continue the conversation today in our Healthy Conversations series. And we are going to do a deeper dive into self-awareness and why it's important in healthy communication and difficult conversations. And I have my awesome podcast producer, Nick Kastner, here to join me in the conversation so that we'll be having a dialogue around the topic. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Dr. Jennifer. It's great to see you this morning. I just finished the part 1 of this conversation. So if you haven't listened to that, I would encourage you all to go listen to that episode, then come into this conversation. But you're turning yourself into a podcaster, Dr. Jennifer. I mean, top-notch stuff.
I'm trying. I mean, I think that hopefully it comes across that like I'm on this journey with everyone. And this is certainly stretching myself out of my comfort zone when I'm used to just being, with my clients one-on-one in a private space. So putting myself out there is helping me look at how self-aware I truly am, Nick.
As I think we all should be doing that constantly. And what I loved about that previous episode was like you acknowledging that there's room to become more self-aware. And that's the stat you shared of like nearly everyone says on a survey that they're fully self-aware. Obviously, not everyone is fully self-aware. So I think that is such like an important thing to even just acknowledge the fact that we all have room to become more self-aware. But to kind of kickstart this conversation, Dr. Jennifer, I would love to understand how we all can develop more self-awareness.
Yes, I think that, by first acknowledging that we have room to grow is the first step. I think what happens is we live in our minds so much and we have so many competing thoughts around how good we are or how much, room for improvement we have. And so oftentimes we send ourselves our own conflicting messages about who we are, how good we are at something. And what happens then is we're looking to our external environment for validation of either of those types of mindsets. And the most important way to improve your self-awareness is to be validating yourself from within. And the first way to do that is with compassion. I think, in the first part of the series, I was pretty heavy-handed with how unself-aware we all are, right? And that, most of us think we're self-aware when we're not. And I want to go back to that with a little bit more compassion for everyone and for anyone who's listened to that, because that can be hard to hear when we think that we are doing a really good job already. And so I think that, when you're paying attention to the internal voice and your internal dialogue, really be able to discern and kind of tease those thoughts apart and recognize that we are not our thoughts, that we are not, the negative or even the over exuberant positive messages that we tell ourselves. I mean, we want to be careful. We're not leaning too much into overly positive, toxic thoughts too. So it's a balance between discerning the self-doubt with the overinflated confidence. So really, validating from within, and that comes back to experience and your own self-validation. That's the first thing. And doing it with compassion, I think, is the key. The critical component is that lean into compassion, because we would certainly want to extend that to others as well. So that's the first thing, is just to be gentle with yourself when you're knowing and recognizing that you need to improve your self-awareness to show up more confidently and more accurate in a variety of contexts and settings. So I don't know. So to improve, so that's the first step.
So then from there, where do we go?
Well, I think depending on what's important to you, you want to always come back to your values and really realign what's important to you in life. And then look at so for example, I will just use myself as like a guinea pig here. And my family is my number one priority, and all of my relationships then extend from that. And then and that really drives my ambition to be successful in my career. So what's interesting is I can sometimes overextend myself into my career because I want to take care of my family. I want to be helping, support them in a variety of different ways. And so unfortunately what happens is then they actually don't feel like they're my primary value. So I have to always come back to like realigning with those values and what's important and looking at my behaviors and my choices that really align with that. So, I'm showing up in the world in conflict of what's actually important to me, when in reality, my family and my relationships are my number one priority. And so I'm not walking around, doing my work that I'm doing on a daily basis, fully aware that I'm not demonstrating that my family's number one. Like, as an example, my parents are here right now, visiting, and they just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and they love it that yeah, I mean, awesome, right? So,
Yeah,
and
yeah, crazy.
it's awesome. And I intentionally decided that I was going to work less while they're here. I can't completely stop working for, 10 days while they're here. But I noticed that, when I get up in the morning and I'm still working and my dad comes out to have a cup of coffee, and like my behavior is still I'm working, and that's not I'm not in that moment. So I'm in that moment, I'm not self-aware and aligned with what's actually important to me. It takes like that internal awareness of like what's happening and aligning with your values. And then obviously then you have some external data that actually supports that you are aligned with your values and making choices around that contributes to being more self-aware in more moments like that. So I don't know if that flows or that makes sense.
No, I mean, it certainly does. And I would say the question, how, when you list your values, and like
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned a few off the top of your head, like how long do you make that list? And then how do you remind yourself and keep that list top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my top values obviously are family and then relationships. So that includes my friendships and significant others. My health actually is third. And while it's should be first, I they're kind of parallel values, if you will. And then my career and my drive and ambition are fourth. And then my faith and my spiritual practice falls, that it all integrates together. But I would say, a list of values beyond 4 or 5, you can get a little blurry. You want to make it simple and very easy. And the thing is, you can take a look at your behaviors and how you show up on a day-to-day basis and how much time you're allocating towards each of those values. And it doesn't have to be equal or all balanced in a given day, but you want to maybe step back and take a look at a whole week or month and say, okay, how well are my values integrated? Doesn't necessarily need to be perfect in a day, but I'm hoping that looks pretty good over the course of a week or especially a month. So that's the first thing. And I think, going back to the question you asked is like, how do you develop self-awareness? That's the internal piece, your internal analysis and evaluation of how you're showing up in the world according to what's important to you. But I would also say the second piece of this is to verify with really good feedback, really honest feedback from those that matter to you. And then you have individuals from each of those values, those domains in your life that you want to trust and check in with to understand and then externally validate how you're showing up in the world.
In part one of this conversation, you mentioned that like going to someone you trust, and I'm actually in between. My first performance review I ever led of like I was giving someone feedback was last Tuesday, and then the second
Oh,
one is this upcoming Tuesday. And I think I'm going to incorporate that because the any performance review or like feedback meeting should be like a two-way street of like I want
mhm.
feedback as well. So I like I guess realize that as like a solid touch point to get feedback from others. But is there? I guess like do you have any guidance on approaching the feedback from others to learn how people perceive you in the world?
Yeah. So are you talking about it like in that context around doing a performance evaluation or just in general in any kind of relationship?
I would say any. Well, I would love for a quick free session. In that context would be helpful. But then I would, especially in the professional workplace context of like, say you're either not like you don't have one coming up, and then also like, should you be asking everyone or should you only ask the people who will give you the most honest feedback?
Well, I think there's two reasons why having that kind of feedback conversation with a variety of people is important. I mean, you have to come back to like your level of trust and your instinct, which is built off of a million moments over the course of your lifetime, to know who will be providing you honest feedback. So that, of course, comes with time. I mean, someone brand new to you is, within, the first 90 days of a job, let's say, trust needs is developed over time. I mean, I think you can have a good instinct around people in terms of how you feel around them when your intuition is really honed. However, intuition can be misleading because people don't necessarily show up as they are early on compared to how they are long term, because we show up as our representative in new situations. We all do it. I do it, especially if I'm nervous in a situation. I'll show up like I will like be poised, I'll be calm, I won't speak a lot in a new setting with new people. And what's interesting is people will assume that I am like guarded and so the perception, because of I'm showing up with my representative, let's say, is very different with than actually who I am. So like it takes time for me to want to like soften my facade a little bit, soften my presence to allow people in. And I do that with a lot of people, especially if it's a blind introduction, if you will. To answer your question more directly in terms of how do you do that, I would say you could have the conversation with a variety of different people that you have varying levels of trust and instinct around. And it's up to you to really discern how meaningful you want to absorb, the meaning you want to make out of that feedback. Every piece of data and feedback is good. And it comes back to really trusting, does that feel true for you, in terms of knowing yourself? And or does that feel maybe not necessarily aligned with, they may not know you very well to give you really, I guess, really good feedback. So you want to draw on a variety of sources, but also then recall like the love, like how long you've known them, the level of trust you feel with them. And, that's based on instinct, like I said, of over a million moments. And of course, when you know someone longer, you're able to discern that a little bit more accurately. And then what can accelerate trust is like, what are you getting feedback on? What's the feedback that you would like to have from this individual person? Do they have their own insight and awareness and maybe level of expertise in this particular area that you like that can demonstrate a little bit of trust from their own experience and their own, I guess, their own like collection of meaningful moments in their life. So, if I'm learning how to give a performance evaluation, for example, for the first time, do I ask for feedback from my manager who's also a brand new manager? And I'm not saying that this is your situation, but in new organizations, especially new organizations that are built with a lot of like, let's say, younger professionals, younger leaders, everyone's learning how to do a performance evaluation kind of at the same time. And if it depends on how long and how well how long they've been doing performance evaluations as well, if you want to gain feedback from them and gain their insight, but then also reach out to a mentor or someone that you have worked with in the past who has at least a decade of experience potentially doing performance evaluations of like, what are your best insights in terms of how to do this well? So that's one thing in terms of getting feedback on how you do a performance evaluation. Now, if you're wanting feedback from the person you're doing a performance evaluation with, is that the question that you are kind of implying?
Yes, yeah, and especially like reacting to your comment earlier of like you should always not only like in that context of like a performance review when you're hosting it, it like is kind of set up to give the person feedback, but like I guess I felt like I should kind of certainly carve out and like have space for them to give me feedback as well.
An interesting approach to this, which I work on with my leaders all the time, is your performance evaluation with a new, like, let's say like in a new engagement or with a new employee, begins at the beginning of that relationship and how you've established working expectations with that person. And so what are the modes of communication? How are you going to be giving in real time feedback over a period of time rather than waiting into the end of the year for a performance evaluation? Because really it is about more of those meaningful moments over a course of time that you want to gather the data from. And it really is like setting it up from the beginning of like, let's talk about our working expectations together and what that looks like when you want feedback in the moment. And then you can also, in that context, suggest or give permission, how would you, like, when you have something that you want to share with me, how will I know that? How will you feel comfortable coming to me with some feedback? How will I know that? How will you be able to communicate that to me or reach out to me saying you want to have that kind of conversation so that you feel safe doing that? Like, I think this so much, I mean, all of this comes back to psychological safety too, in the workplace, especially. Like, that all starts from the very beginning of the relationship and establishing really clear expectations in both directions around communication, how they like to be coached, how they like to be managed, how you like to receive feedback, what works best for you in terms of that kind of information. It's best if the performance review starts at the beginning of the relationship.
What's an important reminder on all of that is the like communication style, frequency, kind of what that feedback loop is. It's very easy for both parties to assume what it is, but it needs to be discussed and determined together.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like oftentimes individuals will start a new job or a new employee relationship, even if, let's say, two individuals who work internally at the same organization all of a sudden start working with each other in a different dynamic. Very rarely do what I call integration conversations happen to understand those types of communication expectations, culture communications. I mean, the culture shifts between two people when they change roles. I mean, you have the culture of the organization, but then you have a culture of the relationship as well. And so then you want to also discuss, like, what does success look like for us in this relationship, so that you're setting the pace up front for what you want to evaluate at the end. It's kind of like a training regimen, if you will, setting up your training sessions right at the beginning. You don't like wait until the end to kind of evaluate. Like, you want to evaluate ongoing, like what feels good, what's working, what doesn't work, what hurts. It's the same with a relationship. But I'm just realizing I want to go back to self-awareness more specifically in terms of like how to develop that as well. But does that help with the perform, like being more aware in that performance evaluation context?
Oh, I mean, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Where were you going with that? With self awareness specifically?
Well, I think what's so hard is that there's three different layers to what I would call insight, which includes self-awareness, other awareness, and then collective awareness. And I touched on that in the first episode of this series. And what we've just gone through, and because I wanted to like weave this our performance evaluation conversation back to the topic of the episode, we kind of like captured that collective awareness, if you will, in the conversation we just had around a performance evaluation. And I think that what's helpful is that we replicate that in a variety of our relationships. It may feel, overly structured in some contexts, but ultimately it actually helps accelerate trust to have those conversations up front. Coming back to like understanding your self-awareness that contributes to understanding others, and then also the collective awareness, is we need to also recognize and really become the best author that we can of our story, and recall all of the moments that actually impacted us the most over the course of our lifetime, because that's where we're going to be able to draw our, let's say, pain points from that trigger us in a variety of contexts that actually blind our self-awareness in moments that matter the most. And so when you're thinking about self-awareness and in the context of any kind of relationship, it can be personal or professional, be thinking about, I mean, we can all probably go back to the moment as a kid when we felt embarrassed for the first time in a social setting. I mean, I remember mine. I mean, I was getting off the school van, and this kid that I had, this young boy that I had a crush on, like told everyone in front of all of our friends that I had big thighs. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, and I was 5 or 6 years old. So like I was little, so like, what kind of big thighs did I have? But I was so embarrassed. And then from there, like that, and that is like, now everyone knows. I will not say this gentleman's name because turns out he's a great man now.
Okay,
but
good.
but he but it was one of those moments where it kind of informs a lot of like how I show up, and I'm just more reserved, and in situations where I don't know people, and I really lead with my intelligence, like my success, often in a variety of settings, and not, I mean, not success in a boastful way, but like, but just, what I do and like, and kind of try to portray my confidence through that rather than just showing up and like knowing that I'm enough. Right. And so I think that when we recognize where we get triggered the most and really understanding where that comes from our story and becoming the best author of our past story into our present story, then we're able to identify situations that maybe we're not as self-aware as we could be, because then we can pay attention to what's happening in the moment and what's coming up for us. So that's an example of how we can help create a little bit more of a positive narrative about who we are, that contributes to our self-awareness. So that's one piece.
And then, so when going back and like reevaluating your own story, I think it's so easy to be like hard on yourself, and because you kind of are like reliving your least favorite moments. How do you suggest maintaining some like self compassion and like keeping that story positive, even though you're highlighting some of the negative?
That's such a great question, because having self-compassion is really, really important. And it's something that you can develop on your own by doing a lot of what, like, a common way to do it is like retraining your thoughts. And it's basically, it goes back to cognitive behavioral therapy, if you will, and recognizing that you are not your thoughts. Like in that example I shared with you, I'm getting really vulnerable here. Like, I, like, for the rest of, like, for a huge majority of my life, I just thought like I'm not worthy in a lot of ways. Like I'm not going to go super deep into all of the all of the things that I
Fair
would say to
enough.
myself.
Fair enough.
But
Yeah.
I do go back to moments like that, and that's not the only one. Like there's many things that happen to all of us as we grow up and even into adulthood. I think the thing is, like, you can have self-compassion, you can work with it on your own, have a self-care practice, which includes taking care of your physical well-being so that you feel good in your body. It completely transforms your nervous system when you take care of your body, because that's triggers are ingrained in our nervous system. It's ingrained in our biology until we shift it physically. So we want to take care of ourselves from a physiological perspective. And we're going to get much more into that when we talk about like the, leadership fitness aspects of what I do with my clients. But I would say it is better to develop self-compassion with a trusted partner. That could be your best friend, that could be one of your parents, that could be a coach. I mean, that could be a therapist, and have someone dialogue and work with you on it, because it can be a lonely process. So you don't necessarily need to do it alone to develop self-compassion. I actually highly encourage that you don't do it alone. You want to be able to support yourself when you don't have anyone there with you. Like that's ideal. Like in moments where like I don't have someone to call, or I'm not with that person that I know could build me up right now, or I could talk to, but you don't have to develop it on your own. So really looking at who is like your most trusted person in your life and discuss some of these things. It may not be it may not be someone that you spend a lot of time with either. It could be just for that purpose that you support each other in that way. So it depends. It could be a mentor, again, all of those different roles. So, but it needs to be intentional. Like you can't just develop self-compassion without focus. And so really developing a practice around it, spending time doing it, and leveraging the help of others, because we're alone enough. We don't need to do everything by ourselves.
Amazing. Yes. And
does that resonate with you?
yeah, and like the last, not doing everything by yourself I think is so important. So absolutely. And I'm shopping around for therapists. I broke up with my therapist like 6 weeks ago. So, and then I engaged one that then like I'm a big in-person therapy. I've tried to do it online, and it's just not for me. So I signed up for one, and then I thought it was in person, but they only do remote. So I now need to find a new person today. So yes, I'm very much a rah therapy person. But that said, Dr. Jennifer, so 2 parts on self-awareness. I'm sure there will be, like, this topic will be a recurring theme throughout this show. But do you have any final thoughts as we close out this 3rd episode?
There's something that I think is really important for us to dive into in another part of this topic, a part of the series related to self-awareness, especially as it relates to the aspect of collective awareness. And that's how we are working virtually, in our hybrid working mode. And so I want to spend some dedicated time on how we can help our audience develop more awareness of how they're showing up in their hybrid working environment, whether that's in person again, and looking at all the social anxieties that go with that, as well as how they're showing up virtually, on Zoom, Teams, however they're working, phone, because it's it requires different muscles to show up in those two different types of contexts. And what I mean by muscles is like awareness muscles and psychological muscles and just like resilience muscles. So, I want to spend some time on that. I don't want to skip over that. That is a really big priority for me and my clients right now. And we're heavily working on it because no one has it figured out quite yet. And I don't think we'll ever have it figured out perfectly. But I think bringing a little bit more awareness and, again, more compassion to how we are doing the work together is going to be critical going forward for the near term into the long term. So I would say continue to, I guess, lean into your self-love, your self-compassion more, and not pay attention too much to that self-critical voice as much as you can, because it's probably not true. Likely false advertising.
Wonderful note to end on. Yeah. So thank you for the time. I felt like this was a solid 30 minutes, another recording in the books.
Good. Well, Nick, I love it that you share about your own experience, and I'm glad that you're venturing into really finding that support to, help you in your own development, self-awareness. And I think it's a really good model, especially for men. So I thank you for just sharing that, because I don't think a lot of men lean into like exploring this part of themselves so that they are safer and healthier in our world, because we need you. We need you guys.
Thank you. We have a timer on how many episodes it'll take for me to break down while we're recording. So I bet there's an episode in the future where I cry on camera. So just know it's in store.
Okay.
I mean, we'll see. We'll see what the topics are, but it can be a good thing.
I love it.
Men hardly ever cry on camera, but I will once. And I also appreciate you sharing some kind of personal, like you said, sharing some personal thoughts, feelings, and authenticity is the buzzword always thrown around when people make content for the internet. But you're hitting the buzzwords and being very, very authentic and true to yourself. So love it.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you. And do you want to take us out?
Yes, of course. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Happy Healthy Leader with Dr. Jennifer Churchill. My name is Nick Kastner. I produce the show. It's edited by Kyle Kua. We are releasing episodes every other week on Tuesdays. So we drop 3 episodes to launch the show, and you will see us again back with a new episode 2 weeks from today.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.